hackers look to exploit to help you better understand the tactics, techniques, procedures, and the motivations of a cyber criminal. And Ben is going to lift the veil on the dark web. We're really excited about this talk today. This should be really interesting. So we're going to hold all of the questions towards the end, and Ben is going to take over now. So Ben, far ahead.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'll just present my screen. Excellent. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I know we're all busy, and taking out half an hour is sometimes quite a challenge in these days. So in 2015, the UK government announced that £1.9 billion would be made available to government departments to shore up their cybersecurity defences. Now, for government departments, they're used to having money taken away. This created a scramble for the money, and you had GCHQ leading the fight, but also MI5, MI6, and the Ministry of Defence, all putting forward extremely compelling cases for why they should be, why they should have the largest slice of this cake. And they all talked about things creating cybersecurity centres of excellence. They talked about creating individuals like this, dashing experts who would save the UK from cyber criminals, from nation state actors. But actually, many cybersecurity experts and commentators thought that we'd be better off trying to reduce this. Your clumsy user that facilitates easy pickings for the cyber criminals, and so really, and certainly my premise has been as a cybersecurity professional and others is to try and increase that learning and try to make people more towards here. And I'm not suggesting for any minute that anybody on this talk is over here. Actually, even by attending this, you're already earning your way to license to kill. But you may have colleagues who you may feel sit in this category who could be a liability within your organization. And what I want to do is to present to you the tactics and procedures used by cyber criminals. I can only talk about a few because we have limited time, but through this I will talk about how they're trying to attack you, and hopefully you can then take these stories back to your colleagues who you may feel need a bit of education. And you know, when we think about it, we think of the power that we have in the palm of our hands. You can sit on the sofa, you can come up with a profound thought, you can send it to the world, and suddenly you're an internet sensation. You can have a funny looking cat and you can earn millions and millions of pounds. But with this power is also in the wrong hands is quite dangerous. And I think we've all seen fairly recent evidence of that. And let me give you another example. How do we get into the situation we are in? Many of you might remember this. You did something called a commute, and you commuted to the office, and usually great advantages in terms of accessibility. You can get your files, you can get your emails, and some organizations have moved all of that up to the cloud. Now the hacker's still there, but all the hacker needs now is your username and password. They don't need to worry about getting onto the network, because the network is the internet. So, and you may be in a situation where you are both of these, you're a hybrid of these, but it's worth understanding. A lot of the time, people have moved to the cloud and they haven't necessarily upped their security in relation to the risk. And that comes on to my first attack that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about invoice redirect. And when I first heard about invoice redirect, I thought it was this incredibly sophisticated scheme. The amount of money that's being stolen out of the Irish economy is absolutely staggering. The figures I have for 5 months last year, it was 4.4 million stolen, and only 1.2 million was recovered. And let's not forget, that's only reported. There are many organizations that are not reporting this. It is a huge problem, and really all it is identity fraud. And if you talk about invoice redirect, you can really narrow it down to two two ways it is done. There's lots of ways it's done. It's people pretending to be somebody else. But there's external invoice redirect where you may get an email from a supplier saying, so the hacker has got into the supplier's email system. They send the email out to one of the people they're expecting invoices to, saying, can you please, we've changed our bank accounts, please send it here. And they send, as people do, they send that cash to the account that's provided, and only when this conversation, the rather awkward conversation, happens a few weeks later when the supplier is asking why they haven't paid yet, does this get discovered. The other one that's quite common is the internal one, where hackers got into a company's email system, and they could pick off anybody to start with. They'll pick them off with a phishing email, get their details, or we'll talk about how they can get their details in a second. But once they get in, then it's easier for them to move to other people's emails, because you're more likely to believe an email coming from a colleague than you are coming from an external source. And then what they do is they spend between, on average, 6 to 18 months within your organization studying what's happening, studying the language that people use, studying when people are on leave, working out when holidays are in that country. And what they'll do is they'll inevitably on a Friday afternoon send an email from the boss to somebody quite junior saying, you must send this money to this account, it's absolutely urgent. And again, we've come across situations where that's discovered weeks or months down the line, and there's a race going on. There's a race to capture the money, because as soon as it leaves the EU, it becomes extremely difficult to get hold of, and also still working out the hackers still in the system, which they invariably are. So how did the hacker get hold of your username and password? You may have used, it's very easy. You can look at any company's email. It's very easy to work out what usernames are. It's very easy through LinkedIn to work out who's working for that company. And you may be using a password that's extremely common. This is the list of 2020. I'm quite impressed with this. I love you, which was a new entry in 2019. We must be all getting more sentimental, but they can try and do that. They can try and use these standard emails, and because you've used a really poor email. But there's something else. You may have signed up to something, and through no fault of your own, whatever you signed up to through your work email, that's been hacked, but you have used the same password, and it's inevitable. People do. When on average, the average person has to remember 70 to 80 passwords. There's no way you can remember 70 to 80 unique passwords. So people reuse passwords. So when you look at all these massive data breaches, all of these have credentials, have people's details, have people's usernames, people's passwords. All these are used for something called credential stuffing. So they're reused, and these credentials are sold online. You can buy these credentials extremely cheaply. You can, with an investment of $500, you can get a return of 20,000, it's estimated. And there are people selling these, people stealing these databases, selling these credentials, and then there's other people trying to reuse these credentials constantly. And look, it can happen to the best one. In perfect timing, before this talk, yesterday afternoon, a tweet came out from Elon Musk at 4:27 saying, if you send me Bitcoins, I'll double it, and this address. Then about 3 minutes later, 7 minutes later, Bill Gates was being just as generous, and Jeff Bezos. And this came out rapidly. Now, actually, it turns out that these people there were too many high profile people to have their emails or their usernames and their emails hacked. This seems to be, the early speculation is this seems to be a security flaw with Twitter. But this goes to exactly demonstrate that you have to be careful what you see and what you read. Just because an email has somebody's signature, is it actually them? You need to up your sort of paranoia level. Right, how can you protect yourself against these things? If you're accessing through the cloud, use multi-factor authentication. You've probably seen it. The EU has introduced PSD2, Payment Services Directive 2, where everybody's having to do secure customer authentication. So your bank account, your online banking, you have to put in those extra digits those digits are time sensitive. So even if the hacker phishes your username, your password, and your multi-factor authentication code, that's only time specific. They have to stay logged in constantly, or as soon as they're logged out, or as soon as you log out the system, they have to get it again. Absolute imperative for cloud computing now. Geographical location. If you know your employees aren't going to be in these various locations, then don't let them log in from these various locations. Actually, some of these invoice redirects, they're not even hiding where they're logging in from. Well, it appears they're not hiding where they're logging in from. So, you know, if you know somebody's not going to be venturing out of Ireland or the UK, then don't let them log out of those places. You need to work out within your organization what processes need to be confirmed by phone call. You know, if it looks suspicious, pick up the phone. If anybody saying changing a bank account, that should be verified with a phone call, those sort of things. Password manager, you know, I've talked about the 60, 70, I've got about 250 passwords. You know, I use a password manager. Lots of people, the UK NCSC recommend using them. Look into using that. And also within your organization, create a zero blame culture. I come from an aircraft engineering background, very much so. You'll hear about within the aircraft industry, there's near air misses. If you report a near air miss within 10 days, you'll be exempt from prosecution within reason. Obviously, if you downed 4 cans of Stella before you took control, and then you are liable. But the point is, the aircraft industry has created this culture where people are open and honest about their mistakes. What you want in your organization are people are open and honest. They say, I think I might have clicked this link. I think I might have filled in my details somewhere. You create that culture within your organization. You find out why people have done it, and then you can create preventative measures for it. If you create that fear within your organization, people aren't upfront, and then you as an organization cannot learn from it. The other thing I'm going to talk about is ransomware. Now, ransomware, for those of you who don't know, is where your computer can be jumbled up with, cryptographically, and jumbled up so well that you won't be able to recover it, and it will take thousands of years for a supercomputer to decrypt your machine. And sorry. And you're in a very difficult place. So you essentially, if you haven't got any backups, and this is not the time to find out if your backups work or not. If you haven't got any backups, you've got 2 decisions. You pay the ransom, or you lose everything on that computer. Whether, and that's something that you need to decide. And this is an absolute epidemic that's going on, and it kind of amazes me that it doesn't make more news. The real target last year was government organizations within the US, schools and county districts. 911 centers were being taken down, schools were being taken down, universities, and because they're the perfect target. They've got lots of money, but years of underinvestment in IT, and really then a lot of these places had to make harsh decisions whether they pay the ransom or they refuse to pay the ransom and they pay the recovery costs. And you can see the difference in terms of the recovery costs versus the ransom. Now, it's a bit of a skewed figure because there would still be recovery costs by paying the ransom. So then you're not comparing exactly, but there is still a significant cost in terms of these recoveries. And really, I think what's most fascinating about ransomware is it's not just some kids, messing around or whatever. This is absolutely organized crime, and there is something that there is prevalence on the dark web called ransomware as a service. So you can become an affiliate for the ransomware. So there are ransomware developers on the dark web, and they create the ransomware. You could become an affiliate with the ransomware, and so you are responsible for trying to target victims. If they get encrypted, the money will be sent to the developer. They will take a cut of it, and you'll get the rest of this. And this is a whole business scheme out there. You know, crime as a service that is available for people. So people specialize in what they're good at, whether they're developing or whether they're good at actually targeting organizations. And let me give you an example. This is probably one of the most documented gangs on the dark web. So I'm just going to talk specifically about this because I think it's quite interesting. There's an organization called GandCrab, and I mean, there's a number of things. So this is a page that you're presented with when your computer is encrypted. You can have it in multiple languages. Your price increases if you don't pay sooner. So they're trying to create that sense of urgency. There's a QR code so you can easily send the money across to them. But they also seem to have their own graphics department, you know, and also note that there is a lot of humor in this, and actually the individuals and forums, they were quite cocky, they were quite jovial, and we'll come back to that bit. So after 18 months of operations, they released a note on their site on the dark web saying, and we have to take these numbers and these figures with a pinch of salt, but they claimed they took $2 billion worth of ransom, or the software ransomed $2 billion, and the organization or the developers took 150 million profit. The first thing that strikes me is that means they're only taking 7.5% cut, which I think is pretty reasonable, actually, considering I think they've done the hard work. But they talk about this. We have proved that by doing evil deeds, retribution does not come. Well, we'll come on to that bit. So, not bad work for 18 months. Now, just as they disappeared, this other organization came along. This other ransomware as a service came along, called Sodino Kibi, and that's the only time I'm going to pronounce it because it catches me out every time. Now, Bleeping Computer did some really good analysis on this, and it really looks like it is the same developers. I don't know if you've ever been in an organization that's been fun, been a pleasure to work with, and then suddenly it gets taken over and the atmosphere seems to just change. There is none of the jovialness, none of the sort of cockiness out of these guys at all. So it appears that they've had a bit of a takeover. So the developers appear to be the same, but the operators within that developer community seem to have changed. And who knows if it was a bloodless queue. The other thing is, and I know what you're thinking, oh, maybe I'll join them. This seems like a good venture. They're actually being extremely selective with their affiliates. So they didn't take everybody across with them. They just took across their most successful affiliates. So, and yeah, so they're out there, just a different name, still causing the same havoc. So again, how do you prevent this? As I alluded to before, test your backups. It is a really scary situation if the first time you're testing your backups is when all of your systems, you can see, 10 years of work down the pan unless you pay the ransom, and this is the first time. So when you're standing outside on that fire picket, and have a think and say, when did we last test our backups? Because it's a very good question, and you should be taking that question back to your organization. Run internal phishing campaigns. Both of these things are, most attacks start with a phishing campaign. They are the most successful. They are the most successful way of getting into an organization. So the best way of training your team, training your organization, is actually starting phishing campaigns. They can be internal. And again, don't publicly flog them and throw rotten fruit at them. It doesn't achieve anything. Learn from it. As an organization, learn from it. And update your systems. What I should have said with the ransomware as a service is they will keep your ransomware up to date. So not only are you paying for the development, you're paying for that ransomware. If somebody produces a decryption, I'll give you an example. So very sadly in Syria, this guy lost his children and his computer got ransomed by GandCrab, and he tweeted about it. And as a result, GandCrab actually created a decryptor that meant that they wouldn't attack any computers in Syria, and they also decrypted this person's machine. From that code, people were able to recognize a flaw within GandCrab and actually created a public decryptor for the whole of the world. Within a couple of days, then GandCrab didn't update for their ransomware, so this decryptor didn't work. So they are providing you ransomware truly as a service. The reason those ransomware gets in is because it's looking for recent exploits every time, and I absolutely get it. My computer tried to update just before this. Now I'm going to update it after, of course. I absolutely get the pain of updating, but the point is these things get in because your system is not updated. So as painful as they are, they do serve a purpose. And really, that's it from me. So I don't know if there are any questions, but thank you very much for your time, and I shall pass it back. So I can't hear you.
Hi, sorry. Thank you, Ben. That was wonderful. Thanks so much for that. It was so interesting. If anybody has any questions, just pop them into the chat. But we do have one or two here that came in prior to the talk. So just to touch on the ransomware, one thing that actually I was interested in, you mentioned, it doesn't make the news. And I know this from a couple of clients of ours, or clients who have spoken about it, that they were in situations where they didn't have the backup, and is the reason it doesn't go into the news is because they don't want to give that type of platform to these types of guys, or why is it that we never hear about this?
Yeah, so the statistics I produced earlier were from public organizations within the US. It is very, very common that private organizations do not want to announce or disclose that it's happened for various reasons. So we're never getting the full statistics in terms of how prevalent this is. But most people will tell you within my industry that it is extremely prevalent. It is a real risk, and that's the case with most of these. People don't want to admit while I talked about a zero blame culture, there are reasons why these things got in, and why they've had to resort to paying the ransom. So people aren't necessarily as open about it as possible. Why it isn't being reported in the news, I don't know. It's a great question. I think it's very interesting.
I suppose as a company, you don't want to show that there's a weakness to your clients or your own
Absolutely.
customers. So presumably that's why it's not spoken about, which is actually counterproductive, because what it's doing is it's not bringing enough attention to other companies that this is what you need to do. And based on that, I suppose the next question I have is, the cost of ransomware to a company, is it quite high, like, to actually get incorporate that into your systems, or is there a reason why people wouldn't be using it? And from a personal side, should we all have something downloaded, or is it just from a big company?
It's not just for a big company. You can have your own internal system absolutely encrypted and attacked. Each ransomware has its own specific vulnerabilities that it's going for in systems, and usually most of these, they're not going for the really complicated, sophisticated targets. There's enough easy pickings out there where companies and organizations haven't updated, and they might not be updating for various reasons. There some updates, some companies have such old systems that an update will absolutely kill their system, and then there's other measures that can be done to avoid that. But if what needs to happen within that organization is they need to recognize that risk and then work out the cost of the actual ransomware. There's no exact figure on it. The average NCSC in the UK came out with the average breach costs on average, 700,000 to 1 million, for small to medium scale companies. So, that can end a company quite quickly. So these are absolutely devastating. And really what companies need to do is to weigh up that cost against the preventative measures. And we say this a lot, a euro or a pound spent in terms of preventative measures will save you £20 spent in actually trying to recover it. So it's hugely important to get on the front foot in terms of this.
And this just to touch on the whole backup thing, and it's the backup really is the biggest I suppose shortfall that people are not doing in order to save themselves. Because I suppose even if you did get infiltrated with this type of
so there are a number of offline backup services who are ransomware proof. So they so you need to make sure, you need to work out why you're doing a backup. That's with all of these things, what's the actual use case for it? So why is it a backup? Because you want to prevent you need to have instant access if those files aren't available, and if it's ransomware, well then that becomes part of your key requirement for what you want the backup for. So it's understanding what you want the backups for, and then actually then deciding how you're actually going to do it. So each case is different, but certainly the first thing you want to check is will this prevent a successful ransomware? Because in addition, if you do have backups happening within your organization, a lot of these ransomwares are trying to target that as well. So you need to make sure whatever solution you have actually addresses that.
And just how paranoid should we be individually about using like Wi-Fi spots or your personal hotspot on your laptop?
I would say if it's I do a bit of Wi-Fi hacking and so on, and annoyingly, WPA2, so the first thing you should be able to see what type, if it's open Wi-Fi, do absolutely avoid it, because you're just blurting out to the world. You might as well be shouting what you're saying. If most require you'll go on and you have to put a password in, that is difficult to get through. Again, with your hotspot, well, your phone is creating a WPA2 encryption to your computer, and then the way it's getting out is encrypted as well. So again, it's just making sure, I know certainly routers used to be delivered with absolutely open. Now most are delivered with a password, and that's great. It's a step in the right direction. Terrible for me. It stops me, having fun and trying to prove to organisations that they're lacking in this area. So it's just everybody having that extra knowledge in terms of understanding what the risks are. In terms of paranoia, there's nothing wrong with being too paranoid. Don't let it prevent you from doing your work. I've seen I've seen organizations where the paranoia is too hard and it's too difficult for the organization to actually conduct their business, and that is the skill. It's actually enabling organizations to conduct their business in the safest manner possible. And that's a constant balance. Convenience and security are constantly fighting against each other.
Okay, well, I think we're just about out of time. If anybody does have any further questions for Ben, please feel free to send them through to us. Thanks so much again for that, Ben. It was really interesting and some great insights there. And just to mention that next week we do have Fostering Culture and Connections Remotely with Brittany Liebert, who is the People Development Specialist at Rapid7. So again, thanks a million, Ben, for that, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.